I firstly want to say that this feels all very formal. This is meant to be more like a workshop, and we're now in this format. But we will make it work. I just feel strange having this division because I wouldn't say I'm a complete expert on Marx, but we're here to talk through a few different concepts together and have some discussions about them. So I'm going to start just with an outline of why we decided to put this session on before handing over to both of our speakers. I think the motivation for this event is, we feel we're in a moment of multiple crises. We have this coupled thing of rising costs, increased rents, poor pay at work, and then the existential threat of the climate crisis hanging over us as well. And I think, it can be really difficult to kind of understand how or why this situation has come about. And I think without a kind of materialist or common shared language of the world, we can kind of experience all these crises as sort of invisible forces conspiring against us. It kind of lends itself to maybe some more kind of conspiratorial thinking that isn't grounded in the material reality of what is kind of guiding the crises we're in. So we want to look back at Capital's most prolific theorist, Marx, or maybe more accurately, the collective intelligence of Marx and his close circle of friends and comrades who collectively penned Capital. And we're going to be discussing specifically how Marx defines capital's mode of operation. We're not super interested here in getting into debates about different forms of Marxism and which one is correct, but more taking a step back and thinking about how he defined capital, what is still relevant today, what we can learn from that. And it's more about, I think, kind of building a collective set of languages by which to understand what is going on around us and thinking through then how, in that context, we have leverage to power in our own workplaces or communities or campaigns. So that's kind of what we're hoping to get out of the session. We're going to be presenting 4 key concepts exploring capital: commodity, work, technology and extraction. And then we're going to have a bit of an open discussion, maybe in groups, and we'll set some guiding questions for those before feeding back. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Seth first, who will talk through the commodity.
So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this platform, so I don't like this situation at all. Could I have some horribly tepid water, please? So if you'll bear with me, we'll get them over. Hopefully that won't show. So why the commodity? So Marx started his inquiry into capitalism through a redress of the commodities. The first chapter in Capital is all about the commodity. So what is a commodity? So a commodity is obviously a product that you might buy, like a tin of Coke or whatever. Or it can be a service. So as Jamie said earlier, it can be the scissors and the haircut. That's the thing, commodity. But why does Marx want to start with the commodity first, to get into exploitation or whatever? And that's because he thought that the commodity said something really important about capitalist society, but also about what is disguised in capitalist society, which is just below the surface. So he started his, as I said, he situated his inquiry into capitalism through the redress of the commodity. And Marx argued that every commodity has a sort of dual nature. So on the one hand, it has what he called a use value, i.e. this is useful, right? It holds water, it's pretty good. It does a thing. And the use value is Marx recognised because it's used to satisfy the human need or desire or want. And this use value, Marx suggests, is the commodity's natural form. It's naturally why it was made, to reach a human need. Because the commodity would satisfy human wants in any society where products of human labour are produced and where goods are consumed. So it doesn't, the reason why it has a use value is because it's not just about capitalism, it has a use outside of capitalism. On the one hand, a commodity also has another value though, which is its exchange value. As a commodity, it must be exchanged before it can be consumed. That's what's unique about a commodity. It is taken to market to be exchanged. Marx suggests a commodity's exchange value is the commodity's social form, because products of human labour only have an exchange value in societies based on commodity production for exchange. And if we leave all these sort of different varying values attached to this, the one thing that all commodities share is the human labour that is spent in producing them. And this labour gives the commodity its value on the market. So Marx has this whole sort of explanation where, like, how long would it take an individual worker maybe to whittle a cut out wood or whatever. And obviously, workers work at different speeds. So what he argues is there's a sort of socially necessary labour time, i.e. a sort of average amount of time that each commodity is made by each worker. And that becomes the mechanism through which wages are sort of like mediated and worked out. But the real problem with the commodity for Marx is that actually when it's on the open market, it actually totally disguises the dead labour, the human labour that went into it. So if we're out, tonight, I expect loads of you will go to the pub after this because it'll be so boring, you want to go drink beer. And when you get into the pub, you'll immediately maybe pay a fiver for the beer. But in that exchange, you're not seeing the whole process of exploitation that went into the production of that beer. You're not seeing the dead labour that went into it. You're not seeing the extraction, the oil industry, everything else that goes behind the commodity. So Marx really wants us to think through what the commodity is, because the commodity, when you begin to unpeel it, reveals the whole of capitalist exploitation in society.
Great, thanks Seth. Jamie will speak to us about work.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to talk about work, and I think work is a really, really important concept for Marx. But I'm also going to say that there are many readings of Marx, and I have a very particular one. So maybe in your groups you'll say, oh, well, I don't agree with that, or the emphasis is different. And I think what's useful about work is probably we all have something to bring to the discussion about work. We have the experience of what we do, of what people we know do, of how different kinds of work have changed. And for Marx, it's a way of getting into thinking about the relationships of capitalism. And so for Marx, work is the capitalist organisation of something that people have always done for all of human history, which is, as Seth says, to find ways through human activity to meet our needs. This is a necessity for everything. We have to find a way to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to find housing, all these sorts of things. Under capitalism, it gets organised in a very specific way, which I'll get on to. But the point that I think is really useful to remember here is Marx talks about labour and the labour process, how we do things, as the way that we as people interact with the world to meet our needs. Now, I don't know what kinds of jobs we do around the room, but lots of the jobs we do today feel like they don't have much connection to how we meet our basic needs anymore. I send emails and somehow there's food in my fridge. This is a strange relationship. But the idea is that, as Seth says, things get produced, but not always to meet basic needs. Lots of the jobs we do create products for sale, or we might teach the next generation of workers. There's a whole range of different activities that we have to do. But I still think it's useful to think a bit about the labour process. And the reason I say this is, think about if you learned to drive a car, or you learned some other kind of skill, how learning that skill changed you. How terrified you were the first time you tried to ride a bicycle or learn to drive. And then it becomes a kind of normal activity for you. That when we go through the process of work, we learn new skills. We become part of reproducing capitalism every day. It's our labour that is the thing that undergirds everything else. And it changes us in the process. One of the main features of capitalism is that for most of us, unless you have a fabulously wealthy family or a lottery ticket or some other reason not to have to go to work, you're probably going to have to go to work for most of your life in order to buy things, in order to survive. Marx makes a joke in Capital, it's maybe not the funniest joke, that we're doubly free under capitalism to go to work. We don't have to work for a particular kind of organisation or a particular person, right? We go and choose who to work for. But we're also free from any other way to meet our needs than by going to work. So not the funniest joke, but there's a double freedom in that. Because most of us don't have farmland. You know, we can't make our own houses, we can't sew our own clothes. We have to go to work to earn money to, well, maybe spend some of it on beer and the rest on other needs. And this for me is what the work relationship is at its core, is we sell our time to somebody else. If you strip back everything else about your working relationship, you are saying to somebody, maybe it's Monday to Friday, it might be slightly different if you do shift work, I am going to sell you my time and let you tell me what to do, and in return, hopefully you'll give me some money that I can go and spend on other things. Now the problem with this relationship, and I don't know how many of you feel this on a Sunday night, or maybe midway through the week, is as someone who sells their time, I don't want to use all my energy at work. You know, I want to do stuff at the end of the day. I want to do stuff at the weekend. I want to see family and friends and so on. The person who buys your work wants to get the most out of the commodity they've bought. They want you to work hard. They might even check up on how you're working, hire other people to check up on you. And so there is a difference in interests at work between the people who buy people's time and the people who have to sell their time. Now why this is important is, first, it helps us explain the Sunday night blues. You know, we don't want to go back to work, we don't want to be told what to do. But also, it helps to explain the exploitation at the core of work. We don't get paid for all of the work that we do. Otherwise, somebody wouldn't employ us to do this. This is the kind of core of exploitation of capitalism. Now, of course, today it can be more complicated. Some people are paid to teach the next generation of workers. Some people to move things around. But at its core, there is an exploitative relationship at work. And one of the things I want to say about this before I wrap up is sometimes people hear this and they say, well, but I like bits of my job. You know, how can it be exploitative? For Marx, economic exploitation is an economic relationship. And it might mean that you enjoy bits of your job. You know, it might mean that you feel like you're, you know, able to buy the things that you want. But at its core, it is the contradiction of capitalism between those who have nothing to sell but their time and people who own factories, own, you know, all manner of things. And so it's also the place where most of us come face to face with the contradictions of capitalism around us. Going to work on Monday and say you don't want to work if you want an idea of what that contradiction looks like. Say, oh, today I don't want to work, and see what happens. And this shows us some of the power relations in society. But also, it constantly puts us into conflict with our bosses. One of the kind of long-term features of work is that it's a bit shit. That we get pushed to do things that we don't want to do, that we don't get paid enough, we lose our wages through inflation. And this constantly causes conflict at work. But for Marx, one of the key things is, what do you do about that conflict? You know, do you say to people you should try and get promoted or try and become a supervisor? Or do you say you should band together with other people and try and do something about it? And that conflict doesn't go away, and it keeps coming back over and over and over again. So that, for me, is the introduction to why work is important for Marx as a kind of foundational idea for helping us think about why the world looks the way it is, but also where we could have power to do something different about it.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to speak a little bit about extraction. It's going to be a little brief, but I think it's more a lens by which to understand Marx's writing in Capital, which is to say, perhaps we could read it as not just a book on economics, but also a book exploring some issues around ecology. And I think it's important to understand with the climate crisis coming down the road is why capitalism itself is inherently at odds with a livable planet, basically. And what we see Marx arguing through his writing is a sort of critique of bourgeois economists at the time, assumption that commodity, monies and profit are natural things in the world. He has all sorts of strange jokes that I don't quite understand, which is him having quips that kind of more mainstream bourgeois economists at the time. And the critique is that these economists take the existence of class society, where a few people own factories and fields that produce what we need and the rest of us have to work for them, as inevitable and natural. And his point is that it's not natural at all. And in Capital, I'm paraphrasing here, but Marx says capital is vampire-like. It lives the more it basically extracts, and that's both out of living labour, so workers. It breeds off extracting as much as possible out of workers, but that's also the case for the planet as well. And that's because in this sort of cycle of commodity exchange, whether that be a good or a service, it creates competition between capitalist businesses, and they kind of, that competition implores them to kind of expand infinitely to outdo their competitors, to make sure that they can be successful. And that means basically with the climate crisis is a symptom of a finite planet with an ideology predicated on infinite expansion. That's what we're seeing at the moment. And I think this is an important point to raise, because to really, I'm sure we all agree, but to really think through how the fight for workers' autonomy is linked to a fight for a livable planet. And you know, there's still concerns about maybe the political savvy of the mainstream climate movement or the trade union movement's commitment to climate justice, and I think it's really important to think through these things together as a whole. Pass back to Jamie again for technology.
Yeah, thank you very much. So technology is often something that's, you know, it becomes a debate around work and around a number of different movements that we're involved in. And I think one of the ways that Marx thinks about technology is about its relationship to labour. So all throughout human history we've used technology in sometimes simple and sometimes much more profound ways. But it's often not the technology that we think of when someone says technology. When we talk about technology, we often think smartphones, social media, the internet, AI. But there's a long, long history of forms of technology changing our labour process and how we interact with them. From basic farming tools to hunting tools. That these have long played a role in the labour process of making it that one person can do more than they used to be able to do. And so technology has shaped human history in quite profound ways. You know, it allows us to produce enough food that some of us can sit on panels and talk about Marx. You know, it allows us to create more than we used to before. And the kind of joke that I made in the first bit about how does me sending emails get food on the table is about how specialised our labour has become through the application of technology. You know, if we go around the room, how many people are involved in agricultural production? It's probably going to be quite a few, right? Whereas some of us probably do incredibly specialised tasks that are only possible because we have a surplus from elsewhere that can be used to support all of us. But the other problem a bit when we think about technology is we often look at technology as like a linear progression. You know, you have hunting tools, then you have agriculture, and like bit by bit you get to Facebook, right? There's a kind of line that is drawn historically. But instead the history of technology is one of contestation over what kinds of technologies we need or want. And often there are dead ends in technology that are not taken up because they're not profitable or they're not useful for capital. And I always think about electric cars when we talk about electric cars today. There were electric cars driving around London in the 1900s, and they proved not to be as profitable as petrol-based cars, and they were replaced. And now Elon Musk claims the wonders of new electric cars because it has a function and is able to be sold today. And so in the workplace, I think this is really important to think about the kinds of technology we have. And there's lots of examples in factory work of the introduction of technology, not because it makes workers' lives easier or makes people able to produce more, but it offers more control for management. And I think this is a really, really important point, because technology isn't this kind of neutral good, but instead is something that people pay for. They design with very particular reasons. It's then used in very particular ways. and is then resisted by people. Marx would call this understanding how technology comes out of existing social relations and then gets used within those social relations. So to put this in simpler terms, if you have a really unequal relationship of power, the technology will be used by those who have the power against people who don't have power. So if you don't have a strong workplace that's organised, the kinds of technology that will be used there will be really exploitative and often quite oppressive. Anyone who's worked in a call centre will probably know exactly what I mean by how technology can be used in this way. Timing people's breaks to the second, finding ways to discipline people. And so Marx has a couple of different ways of talking about technology, and I want to use two quotes because, if we're going to talk about Marx, maybe we can throw some quotes in. Marx says that strikes have regularly given rise to the invention and application of new machines. At the time Marx was writing, lots of the technical innovations that were being brought in were not because they were better. It's not because they provided a new way for us to feed people without food or do other kind of positive things. They were to find ways to break the power of artisan workers by turning some of their tasks into things that could be done by machines, so those people could be moved out of their jobs. That technology became a way to try and break working class power. Marx even goes on to say, and this is a little bit, he's being a little bit hyperbolic, you could write an entire history of invention since 1830 for the sole purpose of providing capital with weapons against working class revolt. So the introduction of new kinds of automated machines to drive workers' power out of the factory and try and replace it with people who are considered to be less skilled. There is, of course, another side of technology, of how it can be used against the intentions of capital. Think of how many WhatsApp groups you're in, how important this has become for organising at work. But also think about the innovations of newspaper and print in the 1900s, how important these were for the socialist movement about organising new kinds of politics, or how we can use technology to engage people in new ways. But I think what's useful about Marx is to remember that WhatsApp only exists because it served a purpose for capital. And actually it's not that great an organising tool in lots of ways, right? But we use it despite the reasons it was developed for. The final thing that I want to say is that technology shows us in a way that exploitation and the continuing exploitation of workers is not actually that straightforward a task. Capital has to constantly develop new innovations, new technical processes, new kinds of management to try and convince us that we should stay at work and we should work hard while we're there. And so this kind of constant new flow of technology is also a sign of weakness in a way. The capitalist process isn't easy to maintain in a normal way and has to kind of constantly be forced upon us. And I think this is a reminder for anyone who's organising at work that if a new technology comes in, we should fight it. We should talk about why it's being used. We should try to make these things no longer seem like a natural process and talk about the politics of technology. And I think Marx gives us some tools to do that.
Thanks, Jamie. So our plan was now to go into some little breakout groups, and we're going to do some prompt discussion questions. I'm aware that the format of the room isn't brilliant for this, but I think we'll give it a go anyway. You can kind of turn your chair around and speak to people behind you. You can bring chairs up to the stage if that's preferable, wherever's good. I'm going to write up some prompt questions that you can discuss any or all of whatever you're interested in, or you can just have a general chat about what you've heard. We can circulate around if you have any questions or want us to expand on anything. But the suggested questions are, where do you create surplus value in your work? Is this obvious? Are you creating a commodity or selling a service? Or is it a bit less clear to you? Maybe you work for a charity or you're in the public sector and it's not as clear. What means do we have available of us to disrupt these kind of relentless cycles of commodity production and exchange, and how can we kind of, as Seth was saying, think through how to better recognise all of the dead labour and processes that we see in commodities and kind of and what might that produce if we were able to do that. How does technology in your workplace serve to intensify your labour? So what disciplinary effects does it have on you? And does it have any more detrimental impacts of that? Maybe it's wiped out whole jobs. You know, the RMT have a campaign at the moment to keep ticket offices open, and that is because technological developments in ticketing machines mean that job is not worthwhile anymore. And how can we forge better connections between the workers' movement and the climate movement? So there's some questions. I'll try to write them up nice and succinctly because I phrase them in quite a long way, but I'll write them up. And I think we'll have maybe 20 minutes or so to discuss those. We can play it by ear a bit, and then we can come back and feedback as a group, I think.
I don't.
Some people might welcome over there. So we have this weird job we work in. That's up as well. He was like, I don't understand. Our problem is like, I was thinking this we have like
especially back then, in the mid-70s, 80s, yeah. It was a big deal, it was very exciting. And, oh yeah, I loved it. I was in the Communist Party. But I'm retired.
about twice or three times at the same now. But anyway, what I do now is I'm applying for the facilities department for the university. So applying with gas certificate, fire certificate. And so electricians who do fire testing, they know what they do. And people who do service the boilers, they know what they're doing. Although even they say because they're helping educate the next workforce and do more research or whatever. And they're just typing things in. And sometimes, you know, I go and automate my own job a little bit by doing scripts because it's meant to be 3 months, but the IT system is going to change. I will be moving on to the IT system. But like a lot of people in facilities, there's people in there who are meant to do interesting things with new technologies where you can see where everybody's sitting and vary the air conditioning because it's on and off. So the university can hit its climate target of 230. There's all this sort of change there. And so there's all that layers of mystery. Pays my bills now. And before I used to be involved in the computer models for the gas network. So putting out price lines, very much of the best. Build this bit of interest. So I might get back into that. You always struggle against the consequences. In theory, I'm self-employed now, so that doesn't matter because I'm one client. The work, it gets mystified where the exploitation happens.
Yeah, I do.
Trained up to be the new obedient worker.
Whereas I get if I'm making things, I get that. Now I'm rich, and if I've had a conversation, I know that just fancy when I have it can't be out to a certain level, aren't it? It knows what I'm looking for with my taking.
So you know that there's so cultural workers who've been drawn into YouTube. It's still this artificial stuff. Yes. But you know there's and then there's the conventional ones. So there's obviously the strike going on to the conventional studios, and there's sort of AI. And then you've got some who are like things like trying to do alternative YouTube, like Nebula, which is owned by the creators. I don't know. And so I think that whole field of intellectual technology and the whole idea of cultural, which is about social reproduction. And I think one thing that we can get into Marx concepts, I think it's only about producing physical things, but there's cultural reproduction that's just valuable. And this is something, I'm working, so when I was in the gas industry, gas keeping people's home, and now I'm in the university sector, which is a fifth of the population is either working or a student. And the same with that culture, that's very powerful. And the thing they're saying when technology is brought about, it was invented for a country first, but there's also the co-opting of music, twisting. So originally the platforms were sort of three ways to communicate, so there's big companies buying it up and dominating. It's
But surely Karl Marx already pointed out this contradiction. Because as you chase labour away, you lost that labour loses the value of consumption because you've gone by it, depending on the money. So there are the crises within what you could argue the economic crisis. You're always trying to chase labour away. Technology comes about, so you struggle change the system of modern production simply because we destructed it. So that brings about chasing labour. And so this is where this dead labour comes in. It's really important. All this technology comes out of past profits, which is dead labour. So but this then chasing that only one consumer. Where does the money come from the consumer to pay?
Coming from those taxes, then it's like this. It's like a
Consumer, that's universal benefits can only come out of struggle, will only come out of this on the way.
Everything comes out of struggle, safety, legislation, all these things about compliance, all these rules.
Okay, everyone, we're going to come back in 3 or 4 minutes, and it'd be great to hear about what you've been discussing, or if you have any questions. So 3 or 4 minutes, and we're going to come back.
Is that switch on the green? Because we think we may be control producers, but nowadays you do need a mobile phone, otherwise you go to the pub and all your mates will go somewhere else. Because so what becomes that minimum standard of living? What used to be a luxury becomes an essential because it's around you. And you're ticking off there, I can do it, but there's certain people who still use it. And they use that method to say, the replacement workers out there, and they're the unionised workers, but also this thing of time-saving technology, they've moved, what the work that used to be done by travel agents and brokers is now done by us, searching around, and so this thing, we've got this choice. We actually spent a long time that if you had to read Money Save Expert, buy this token to get the real price. You're already just having to do this job to get the real price, because you only get the real price if you do the special offer, and you only get to consume that thing if you learn how to do a plugin that hides the ads because it's just unbearable, and then you go through these other subscription services, Patreon, which goes up, and then that's fallen because they had investors who need to recover their money, so they other things, and so anyway,
rather than allowing the tech companies to be part of it, I feel like that's...
Also, when we look at history, a lot of these movements that get seen as anti-technology weren't. They were actually for democratic technology. The Luddites weren't against labour saving. They were against that they were going to lose their jobs and other people were going to replace them. The workers of the railway aren't against the things. It's that they're going to lose their job and be replaced by cheap.
So basically that is going to be owned by that we can all isn't owned by the force. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, one more minute and then we're going to do some feedback.
But that's the problem now is anybody can make an alternative, but they've got the network effect. And then they've got it's the ownership, and it's that point of struggle there, or do you go outside it, try to do an alternative, what's it got? So you need to have power, and you can bring so you need, so the leading heights of the economy are now Facebook or Meta and Alphabet rather than, but they're also the gas stations. There's this movement where they are.
Since it's still on Merseyside, the train, the local train, trying to get each like a drive and golden tickets, direct argument, not only did it say their rights about
Okay, should we wrap up and hear from our groups about what came out of their discussions? Before we do, I should have also said that we're very lucky today to have some comrades from a Marx reading group that we've been doing for almost a year now in London, and we still haven't finished volume 1. But it's been a really interesting group, and it's really the main motivating reason for putting this session on. So if you had one of them, lucky you. I hope it was helpful and enlightening. But I think before we go to general feedback, we were quite interested to hear if anyone discussed the question, where do you create surplus value in your work, and couldn't place it at all, as in you couldn't see a profit motive for your employment. Maybe you work in a charity or you work in the public sector. Did anyone? Yes, would you be willing to share? Amazing, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just what you said. I work in the charity sector. I've worked in it for more years now. And I can see how in big charities the bosses can cream off. The surplus value goes to the bosses. It's funny though, because you're not producing that surplus value across the workforce. It's only those who are fundraising who are technically earning that money. You could argue that the charity activity is what creates the case for the funders. So I guess that's there, I'm sort of reasoning it through. But as was discussed on the Abolish NGOs panel earlier, all charities are sort of answerable to a volunteer trustee board who are actually your employers. So your actual final employers who hold the authority over the organisation are not earning any profit from what your work is doing. So I find it, I don't know, but people in my group had interesting things to say about maybe different forms of capital in like a sort of Bourdieu sense, or like, and then we moved on.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else from the group want to share? Or Jamie have any? We have some eager hands. All right, please, over here.
It's all the same thing, and also, yeah, so the three of us, or I was last year, and these two are now sabbatical officers, the student union, Sussex Student Union. And like, it's kind of confusing because the role is like, basically to run political campaigns, but we're also directors of a trading company, you're a trustee of a charity, amongst a whole load of other things. And like, I think the best sort of, I wrote like a note, and the best sort of thing that we could get to is that like, the work that we do kind of provides the university this kind of like scapegoat or sort of social capital to be like, hey look, we're progressive, we do this thing to kind of maybe like pacify dissent, which is valuable. Because there was also this really other interesting thing where someone had a like role where like it was this thing where like they would have it was basically like a model who would have been offered money, he was like they would have been paid to be like an activist model for brands like fast fashion brands like Uniqlo, etc. And they would have basically paid for them to be like, hey, this brand's great, but like they're basically paying for greenwashing there, right? Like the value, like the thing that they're buying, the commodity isn't actually like the model or the activist. What they're doing like it's like valuable to them to like pay for that. And there was like another one who's sort of similar to that. But yeah, it's like I think it's like a social capital thing, and like maybe that's what the value is. It's like provides like a pacifying thing. But like, did any of you want?
Yeah, just wanted to add as well, the kind of like the way that it works means that there's a lot of like burnout, there's a culture of burnout, and so the sabbatical officers, whilst they are there to kind of represent students and fight for the rights of students, which is ultimately creating a value that I think we all believe in on a very like personal level. Your energy and your time is kind of is exploited in a sense, because you're constantly in burnout, and you're in burnout because you're working in relation to a university that exists as a business, which is there to kind of like extract from the students, and so being caught in that in between means that your labour is being constantly exploited, as well as almost like your personality as a representative of like a really large body of students. Did you want to add anything? I was like, all the same.
Yeah, it's the thing it's fine. I think just like where there's so many like there's all these like really kind of high expectations and multiple responsibilities that you have to do as really young adults in an institution that's getting, you know, millions of pounds from students, and then basically then all like it's like huge responsibility to sit on university committees and represent 20,000 students and like you know, be a trustee and be a company board director and all these things. It's just like an obscene amount of work all of the time that like I think the value that we want to get out of it is also to like make students' lives better. That's the whole purpose that we do it, and I think that is a value that we bring, but then there's all these like overlapping like ridiculous expectations and like not paid enough for the level of responsibility that you have, that there's like it's like mass exploitation of like young adults across the country that are in these roles for like out of their passions. So it's like, I don't know, it's just, I think it was just really interesting to be like, the value is like, yeah, I suppose like social capital or like, you know, value to students in a kind of very social setting, but then like the level of exploitation that's involved in it is like immense, and like is like a whole cultural problem across the country, I think. So, yeah.
One from all of us three.
Yeah,
really
ridiculous.
I don't know if any other groups wanted to share. Yes, please.
So yeah, we were talking about the ways that like our particular like work produces value, and as I was saying, like I work. For those who want the discussion, I've never said it like 20 times already. I work as a teaching assistant in primary schools, but I work for an agency staff, so I'm not in a permanent placement in a school. I get called in where I'm needed, or I might have a long-term placement at a given moment, but that's unimportant. And the important thing to know is that I'm responding, like there is a sense in which like I am meeting the legitimate need of like caring for a kid, because that's something that's a work that would need to be done regardless of like sort of money that has. There needs to be some sort of care for young, and then there's also like the additional like helping them communicate, teaching language skills which help us like exist with each other and types of things. So that is work that like would exist, or would that's something that's a need in place that I am meeting, but a lot of that, I realise, a lot of the thing that I'm paid for is to be there while the parent works. To be that sort of like person, like the reason why school is 9 till 3, Monday through Friday, isn't because that's when learning happens best for the children. They learn the best at those times. No, it's because that's when people work. So that's why I'm there. And like sort of my role is, alongside meeting the needs of the children, is also producing the value of being there to enable the systems of other forms of work to happen at the same time.
Thank you. That's I think it's really interesting to think through the kind of knock-on effects of your work and how it enables capitalism beyond your own workplace. I think Jamie spoke to that when he was talking. So yeah, thanks for sharing. I don't know if anyone else wanted to share, or if anyone discussed any of the other questions about technology or commodities or climate. Yeah, over here.
Hi, I'm here with my comrades from the union Equity, representing actors, performers and other creative workers. Technology has been a massive thing for us at the moment because of the rise of AI, particularly at the moment, looking at, in all aspects of performance, but particularly when it comes to voice actors, audio performance, particularly looking at like audiobooks, voiceovers, that sort of stuff. And I think what we've really been trying to look at strategically as a union is that we can't stop the technology, but what we can do is really mobilise to agitate for regulation and laws and protections so that the technology works for the worker. The technology is not necessarily maybe inherently bad, though I feel like I'm sort of contradicting a point that was made earlier, so I'm happy to receive pushback on that. But we need to make the technology work for us, and I think an example might be if an actor has their voice synthesized and Amazon want to use that for an audiobook. Well, if that voice that has been synthesized has been properly licensed and the actor is going to receive a healthy payment for that synthesized voice, there could be a benefit because there might be books that would maybe ordinarily not get an audiobook recording, maybe something fringe, more niche, that can now have an audiobook recording that makes it more accessible to a wider audience. And the workers then also get payment, and that could be great, but that requires us to be like, okay, how do we make this technology work for us as workers? And I think that's sometimes we maybe get too focused on should we be supporting or resisting a particular technology rather than looking like how do we make this technology work for us, because I think historically we've seen it's almost impossible to stop a technology.
Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Oh, we're back here.
Yeah, so with technology, technology on its own isn't bad, it can benefit people, but it comes down to who owns it. So for example, computer scientists can spend time programming something, but they won't own it at the end of the day, and someone rich will buy it and then sell it to other businesses and extend that profit. So in that situation, the people that created it aren't the people benefiting from it, it's the rich who end up owning it at the end of the day. So it's not good, but the technology can be good.
Thank you. Oh, we've got two over here. You first.
So in our group we kind of, there was a mixture of kind of industries that we work in, but we work in education, software development, creating websites, and we kind of struggled, I think, to kind of quantify the value we kind of create because it's a bit intangible. But for example, in education, one of the things is about sort of ensuring students are happy and kind of stay on in their courses, and that helps the reputation of the college. But we also talked a bit about the kind of the potential for these technologies to be kind of monitoring us as well. So it's kind of can be used to sort of count keystrokes that people are typing in and stuff. And personally, I do struggle a bit with the kind of increase of the use of technology at work, because these things are great for helping us to communicate with each other, but ultimately, WhatsApp is owned by Meta. Zoom's a pretty huge corporation, and they're just creating profit for themselves. So they might have sort of benefits for us, but it's hard to see how ultimately they're helping to, I think, make the world a better place.
I think it's interesting also about AI and these other social media technologies. are, I don't know much about the history of technology, so I'm not going to make a massive generalization and say they are the only thing that do this, but they're very distinct in that they're both, they're owned by the capitalists who can use them to monitor, discipline, exploit, but they're also extractive models in the first place. So the emergence of these technologies and the function of these technologies relies upon the extraction of huge bodies of data that don't belong to the technology producers in the first place. So the AI, these large language models, produce on the basis of extraction of data that they've breached privacy law, they've breached data protection law, they've breached copyright law to access. And similarly, the sort of gig economy apps, sort of in the unfolding of Uber, and I imagine many others, there was lots of breaching of law and labour protections and sort of precedents, legal precedents, so as to establish themselves as an outlier within a market, and then establish themselves as having such a strong foothold that they like displace the prior market actors, I guess. So there's something interesting sort of coming back to you about like ownership in relation to technology and who's using it and who's overseeing it. That a lot of these technologies are also, they're not just owned and then used against us, but actually using us to function. That social media's product is us, more or less. We are sold to the advertisers who buy space on social media platforms. We are the data that goes into these large language models that allows them to function and refine so as to become things that then can also replace us. So there's this sort of interesting Ouroboros sort of circular process with that kind of technology that I think is quite a new development in technology and extraction. I don't know, maybe I'm waffling a load of crap.
No, not at all. I think. Do you want to respond? Oh. Hands everywhere. Okay. We'll go to Lou, and then at the back, and then there was another one as well.
I just wanted to expand a little bit and just reflect on something that we read in Marx's Capital in our book club that I've thought about quite a lot since. And it was basically, it was a bit where he was talking about the history of capital and how it all went down. And he was talking about the cotton weavers before there was these big like cotton spinning machines. It was all done by hand, and it was these like artisan producers. And when those machines came into force, all of those people lost their jobs, basically, because they just couldn't produce it at the rate that the machines did. And he's kind of said that at the time, like, everybody sort of lamented this. It was noted that these people were sort of down and out, but it was felt that on the whole, because society had gained such a massive ability to make cotton so quickly and everyone had more access to cotton, and that was brilliant, that on the whole it was still a good thing. Like, if these people were down and out, yeah, but like, on the whole, everyone was better off for it, and like hopefully that would be okay. And I think we still kind of see that language being used now as new developments come through. Like you were saying before about how, we would be able to have these like audiobooks that might not have been created before, and that's good on the whole. Like if it's not kind of leading to those people being down and out, that's like the flip side. And then somebody recently said to me, like, because I was talking about how terrible everything was, as you do. And they were like, would you rather have lived in like the 1920s, like, when there wasn't such a lot of technology? And I was like, well, no, but like, and I think we need to be really careful. I'm trying to think what my original point was here. Yeah, because it's going to carry on, basically, as Marx kind of pointed out how it happened, that cycle will continue. And we've talked a lot about AI, and my ex-boyfriend used to work in general artificial intelligence, so trying to make a sort of human-like machine that can think for itself. And we need to be really, really careful about where we're heading and who's in control of these machines, because that could be a fantastic thing. Like one day, none of us, like it might be that none of us have to work, and we get our basic needs, and we can just create and be nice to each other all the time, and that can be our personal life rather than working. But like for that to happen, general artificial intelligence would have to be in the hands of the people, working for the people. And at the moment, it's being produced by companies like Google, and that's not the people. And there's people within those companies trying to trying to push to get Google to think about how they're going to make this work with society, but really, like, it's not in their interest to make it work with society because they want to make money for themselves. And I think it's something that we as a movement needs to be really aware of that happening. Yeah, sorry, that was a slight rant, but
no, thanks, Lorna. Yeah, we had someone at the back with a hand.
Yeah, I'm slightly going back here to an early question, hope that's okay. And just really sort of also building on what the comrade over here has said about teaching, which I'm also involved with. And I think possibly this is something you're going to get on to, but I think, you know, the whole idea of social reproduction becomes really important in that context. So the whole question of the fact that we're not just, all of us are not producing, some of us are really involved in things which under capitalism are about reproducing the workforce in various ways. So we're getting people ready to become workers with certain skills which are considered needed by the capitalist system through things like teaching. And of course, you know, looking at social reproduction is really important for any kind of analysis of gender, because of all the kind of gendered work of care that is done. And I think, you know, for a lot of us who work in some aspects of that, I think looking at not just production but also social reproduction is really important.
Thank you. Anyone else have a hand? Or... Yes, please. I just wanted to pick up on that because also the previous speaker was talking about reproduction, and there is a very interesting sociologist in Ireland called Kathleen Lynch, who's written a book called Care and Capitalism, and talks very specifically about the underlying. So we're talking about the surplus that we're all producing, but the surplus is also the fact that we're, you know, somebody else will mind our children and somebody else will raise them and the internet will keep them busy. And I think there's something kind of interesting then about thinking about what's the model going forward, like how do we change that. And actually the interesting thing that she posits in that book is this idea about how we actually need to change the model to a society of care, love and solidarity, which in many circles is seen as too soft, but actually when you break it down, it actually encompasses both ecology and sustainability of the environment, as well as how we interact with each other and how we kind of further the human race. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. Thank you. We'll go back to this comrade and then, here and then here in the front.
So I think that was one of the things that I wanted, that when we were talking about technology, that I really wanted to like think about as well, which was the idea of like technology, like the sort of like purpose we think of it as, is something that if we want to accomplish a goal, then in our society that is to accomplish that goal in order to produce money, and that's the idea behind it. But if we want to accomplish a goal, having that technology in place to facilitate the ease of being able to do that. And then you start thinking about, okay, so if that's there to help me more easily meet that need, what if the way that this technology is working is to mask the idea of like, oh, this model works, we just need a new technology that can fit this unfulfilled need. We need this new technology, and we never actually start to question the things like, why are these needs not being met? Why are these people uncared for? Why is this work? Even the idea of like charities, like the idea behind a charity is to meet that unfulfilled need that is going by. Don't get me wrong, a lot of charities also exist to try and challenge the way that things are structured in order to be able to, don't get me wrong. But so the purpose of a technology is sort of like, oh, put this in, we get this out type of idea behind it. Instead of thinking, why is this a need that we need to meet? Why is this need not being met? Why is this work not being why are we, because oftentimes the reason why that work isn't being met is because it's not profitable. And instead of thinking, oh, maybe we need to restructure things, maybe think the way things work isn't helping, it's the thought that, oh, but if we had this technology that could magically do it for us, we would then do it. And there's sort of like the purpose of technology in that context is to allow us to continue this form of exploitation because it gives this promise that, oh, things will be fine if we just invent the next thing.
Thanks. And then, yeah, down here at the front.
I think the task you set people were to look at their individual work and what they're selling and the commodities is good to look at. But as you said, it's very complex and there's lots of chains of it. And also, you said, oh, there's this averaging in the cup. And now the averaging is also, there's negative. But the thing we can look to is that capital is growing, the assets are growing, and new forms of property are growing, intellectual property. And if the charity sector, where actually that is also growing, is the place where capital's growing a lot. And you could look back to the philanthropy of the libraries, and you could sort of see the chains there that's training new workers. And it's got so complex, it's hard to analyse. But the thing we can look at is that our wages relative to, and the standard of living, what we get relative to capital is ever diminishing, and so all this activity, even within the charity sector, that is an exploitation that it pushes in that direction while capitalism exists. And then the question that Marx doesn't really answer of how are we going to change it and what's happening, but it's still good to analyse it. But I do wonder whether Marx is of his time a while ago, and we can continue his analysis, but sometimes we're a bit like some of the things he discovered have become so true that when you start to alter them, you start to redefine things. So like scientists say, oh, well, energy is always conserved, mass always conserved, and then they discover something new and go, oh, well, they can be interchanged, and there's a new form of energy, new form of mass. And I think analysis about reproducing social, new form, unwaged labour and the interplay of technology and are these charity workers. I haven't got the solution myself, but we're now 100 years on, and it provides a good basis for where we are. But anyway, that's you can respond to that.
Yeah. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, sort of. I think technology's risen its head a lot in the conversation, and I think there's another way of maybe thinking through the development of technology. Sorry. As a response to our struggle, so as workers, so the example I often use when we're thinking about how we, through our struggle, may drive technological innovation, is the example of like people who might have worked in a car factory maybe 40, 50 years ago, and they were the most skilled workers in that factory. They were the people who were able to put the car engine in, they're like mechanics. And they decided they're going to go on strike, and because they're the only people who can actually put the engines in the car, they managed to grind the factory to a halt, and management cave into their demands, right? So to get over the power that those workers have in their composition, capital then develops a Fordist factory line, right? So it recomposes technology and simplifies the tasks, and nobody really knows what they're doing anymore. They're just putting bolts on and whatever, because they can be replaced. So in a weird way, our struggle against capital provides capitalism with sort of novel technological innovations. It will like respond to our struggle. So we're not passive agents in history. Capitalism isn't something I think that's just sitting upon us and oppressing us. We're also driving we're driving its development through our struggle at the same time. So it's kind of, maybe it's another way of thinking through technology. And then of course, those workers' power is decomposed, what they had. And now what they have to do is recompose their power in relationship to the new technological development. And the only way that we can get out of this cycle of decomposition and recomposition what I think Marx identifies in Capital, in the structural imbalances in class society. So, like, capitalists need us, right, to produce, but we don't need them to produce, right? And I think that's the take home from this, is like, yeah, what you're saying. I don't think that problem's gone away 100 years later from when Marx wrote Capital, basically.
Yeah, I want to say a couple of things, and hopefully the technology won't try and intervene. So I think there's a couple of points to make. The first is, for my reading of Marx, Marx has a really specific meaning to work that is productive and work that is unproductive. And I think often it has been taken on by people to say that factory work is the only work that matters, that other work doesn't. And I think there's another reading that we can have of this. So when Marx talks about work that is productive, he talks about work that is directly producing surplus value. It's directly producing profit in the capitalist work relationship. Now, if you were to try and start a capitalist society in which there was only a factory, nothing would ever get made, because there would be no workers to go into it, no one would be fed after work, nobody would be looked after. And so there's a whole range of what Marx calls unproductive work that's necessary for capital to function. And in a way, the term is a little unhelpful, unproductive, because it makes it sound like it's not needed, whereas we've had a bunch of contributions talking about how central this is to our lives, to reproduce ourselves and reproduce others. But I think what's useful about it is to think about what capital values, like where capital puts its time and energy and investment, is not into the things around love and solidarity and care, but into ways of making money and accumulating more and more capital. And so in part, like, asking you to think about where value is produced in your work is one of those things of trying to unpick how capitalism works today. And to say it's not experts on panels, and I mean, we're certainly not experts on panels, but it's that you can start from your own work, talk to the people around you, talk about what's happening. Is, for me, reading Marx is telling you that actually, like, your work matters, and the relationships that come out of your work are important, and they can be the start of building a radical politics that can unpick these relationships and how they work in practice. But I think it's really, really important that we talk about how to go beyond just reading Capital, and how we can fill in the other important parts and think about the struggles that come out of it. And I think part of this too is about talking about technology. And I think maybe there's a bit of a separation here of, like, the idea of technology and then the practices and, like, actual forms of technology that are used. So I have a bit of a bugbear about AI because it's not a thing. It's loads of different things. So, like, I work in university, I make terrible slides by clicking the creative button on PowerPoint, and it, like, adds a picture. That's a form of AI. Like, it's a pretty rubbish one, right? But it, you know, makes my slides look slightly nicer. And then there are things like general AI, or there's mimicking voices and using them elsewhere. Is instead we need to ask, like, what is the instance of this technology? How is it being used? How is the labour of others embedded in it? You know, how does it take value from other places and use it elsewhere? And to think about how we can fight for alternative kinds of technology. Because when Marx talks about, you know, the productive capability of producing all this cotton, is there's an excitement that actually we can provide everything for everybody. We just are not in a system that allows us to do that. And so we shouldn't say that, you know, technology in its current form is good or bad or neutral or whatever it is. It's used by capital to exploit and oppress us, and it could be free to do something different. But the only way we're going to get that is through struggle, because capital is not going to give these things up because we have a nice argument or we've convinced them. You know, we have to cross the river of fire, as a socialist once said, to think about how we can use those things differently. And, you know, AI gives us the potential for a very different way of doing some things, right? But it has to be a fight to get those things the way we would want them.
Thank you, Jamie. I think that's about all we have time for this evening. I hope you all found it useful. it's a bit of a weird follow-on from what Jamie said, because we should all be doing more than reading Capital, but if you also want to read Capital, that's just advice, which you should, because I think it is helpful, and hopefully this has been helpful in understanding how you operate in the world and why it exists the way it does, and how it potentially could be different. Going back to our reading group, our comrade Colin, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, has just written a book called Capital Condensed, and it is all 3 volumes of Capital in something ridiculous like 135 pages. And I can say, I think there's a lot of value to spending a year reading just volume 1 with a group of comrades, and I'm not discouraging people from doing that, but I think this is a really excellent study tool and to help you actually break down a bit of what it's saying. He sent us up some books that you can buy for like half price, they're like £6, but he's also going to be doing a book launch on Monday evening at 7:30 at a pub called, it's either called Ye Crack or The Crack. I've seen it written differently everywhere else, every single place. But we'll be there at 7:30 on Monday if anyone is now got the Marx bug and wants to talk about it even more.
Come and buy our commodity.
Come and buy our commodity, exactly. Thanks everyone.